The first thing Maldrik noticed was not the empty cradle. It was the silence of the silver bells. 12 of them hung above the nursery door, each forged to ring whenever the newborn heir breathed beneath the palace roof. They had chimed through councils, storms, and the darkest hours before dawn. Now they hung perfectly still, while the Wolf King stood in the doorway with the scent of roasted pheasant, winter roses, and another woman's perfume clinging to his black coat. Behind him, Korvira stopped smiling. The nursery windows were open to the evening cold. The wardrobe doors gaped wide. Half the queen's gowns were gone, along with every woolen wrap made for the child. In the golden cradle lay only a pale blue ribbon tied around a disc of blank white wax. Maldrik crossed the room so quickly that one of the dining gloves slipped from his hand. He pressed his palm against the mattress. Cold. Not recently cold, but abandoned for hours cold. His wolf rose under his skin with such violence that the carved bedpost trembled. "Korvira," he called, though the room had already answered him. He searched behind the curtains, inside the bathing room, beneath the canopy, as if a queen and a newborn might be concealed by silk. Then he lifted the wax disc. The surface looked empty, until the heat of his hand awakened a line of blue fire. "You chose the table where I was humiliated. I chose the road where our son may live. Do not follow unless you are prepared to arrive without a crown." Korvira whispered his name from the doorway. Maldrik turned, and for one dangerous instant, his eyes burned the amber of a hunting wolf. She stepped backward. The dinner had been her idea, but the insult had been his choice. For 6 months, court gossip had called Korvira his mistress. Maldrik had denied it in private, and tolerated it in public, because she was the daughter of Lord Brakan, commander of the Eastern Pax, whose soldiers guarded the kingdom against the hollow moon. Korvira had touched his sleeve at feasts, leaned close during councils, and arranged a private supper that evening at the Glass Heart. Maldrik had gone because Brakan threatened to withdraw 10,000 spears if the king refused the alliance his daughter represented. He had told himself a meal was not betrayal. He had ignored the servants who watched them leave together. He had ignored Korvira standing at the high window with their 3-week-old son in her arms. "Where is she?" he demanded. Korvira's face whitened. "I do not know." He heard truth in the rhythm of her heart, but not innocence. "My father said the queen would endure embarrassment if the realm required it. He said queens always do." Maldrik closed his fist around the wax until its edge cut him. "My queen is not a wall built to absorb my cowardice." The admission came too late to save him from what followed. Somewhere far beyond the palace, a wolf pup cried through the blood bond that linked every ruler of Varkesh to the heir. The cry broke into static, then vanished. Korvira had left before sunset in a laundry wagon driven by an old palace keeper named Torven. She wore a servant's gray cloak over the blue gown in which she had watched her husband ride away beside Korvira. Her newborn son, Corvus, slept against her chest, unaware that a thin black crescent had appeared behind his left ear. The mark had not been there that morning. It emerged when the palace bells announced Maldrik's departure for the private dinner, and with it came a fever no healer could cool. Korvira knew the mark because her mother had died carrying the same one. It belonged to the Forsaken Vow, an ancient curse older than Varkesh's throne. A wolf king could marry for politics, desire another, even dissolve a union under law. But if he publicly diminished the mother of his heir while the child remained in the first moon of life, the crown's magic interpreted the humiliation as rejection of the bloodline itself. The infant would be claimed by the hollow moon at the next moonrise. Palace scholars had dismissed the curse as a fable invented to frighten faithless kings. Korvira had found proof in a sealed midwife's journal 2 days after Corvus was born. She had shown the passage to Maldrik. He had kissed her forehead, promised to read it after the border council, and left it unopened on his desk. The only recorded cure lay beyond the kingdom, in the Valley of Unnamed Wolves, where the first rulers had forged the crown bond. The journal gave 3 conditions. The rejected mother must carry the child there willingly. The king must follow without royal command, soldiers, or crown. And before moonrise on the 3rd night, he must surrender something the throne could never restore. Korvira did not know what that sacrifice meant. She knew only that remaining in the palace guaranteed her son's death. Torvin drove through a service gate while guards changed shifts, then abandoned the wagon at a mill outside the capital. From there, Korvira rode north on a sturdy mare, stopping every hour to feed corvies and press snow against his burning skin. She was not fleeing merely to punish Maldrik. She had spent 2 years loving a man who spoke tenderly in locked rooms and became silent whenever tenderness cost him authority. Their marriage had begun as a peace pact between the crown and the river clans, yet affection had grown in stolen breakfasts, winter hunts, and nights when he admitted that kingship felt like armor welded to his bones. She knew the man beneath it. That knowledge made his choice hurt more, not less. He had let a room full of nobles believe she could be shamed because correcting them might weaken him. Now her son carried the price. Maldrik found the unopened journal on his desk. By midnight he had read it twice and summoned every healer in the palace, only to dismiss them when none could deny its evidence. He ordered the gates sealed, then remembered the message. No royal command, no soldiers, no crown. The curse had been built to distinguish devotion from possession. If he pursued Korvira as a king, reclaiming his property, he would strengthen it. Maldrik removed the moonstone crown and set it on the council table. Bracken objected first. The commander arrived in armor with Torvara at his side and declared the queen's departure an abduction of the heir. "Call the packs," he urged. "Bring her back before the court sees weakness." Maldrik looked at the men who had taught him to confuse domination with strength. "The court has already seen my weakness. It watched me hide behind your approval." He stripped the royal wolf clasp from his coat and placed it beside the crown. "Until I return, the council governs under the queen's seal." Bracken laughed. "She abandoned her post. She saved the heir while I was dining with the blade held to his throat." Torvara flinched, but Maldrik did not absolve her. He also did not use her as a shield for his own choice. When Bracken reached for the crown, the moonstone darkened. Maldrik saw hunger in the commander's face, and understood that the dinner had never been only about gossip. Bracken had wanted the queen displaced, the king isolated, and his daughter near the succession. The curse had offered him a weapon. Maldrik left through the northern gate wearing plain riding leathers, carrying a water skin, a hunting knife, and the blue wax disc. No escort followed. Snow erased the road beyond the last village, but Korvira's scent remained faintly woven through the wind. Cedar soap, milk, and the river mint she chewed when anxious. By dawn he found the laundry wagon, then the hoof prints leading toward the mountains. A squad of Bracken's riders found them too. Maldrik watched from a ridge as 6 armed men questioned the miller. They wore no royal colors. He could have ordered them to withdraw, yet the rules forbade command, and their presence proved Bracken intended to seize the child before the king could break the curse. Maldrik shifted into wolf form behind the trees. His black wolf was enormous, marked with silver along the spine, but crossing the palace boundary without the crown had weakened him. The transformation tore rather than flowed. He circled downwind, scattered the riders' horses with a warning howl, and cut their saddle straps while they struggled to regain control. He did not kill them. Death would alert Bracken through the pack bond. Delay was more useful. By the time they organized, Maldrik was human again, bleeding from one shoulder and following Korvira north. Korvira reached the frozen river Sarn at midday. The bridge had collapsed during the previous spring floods, leaving only black stone pillars and a rope ferry locked on the opposite bank. Behind her, distant horns moved through the forest. Torvin had warned that Bracken controlled every northern road. Korvira wrapped Corvus beneath her cloak and walked onto the ice. The surface groaned. She tested each step with a fallen branch, choosing cloudy ice over clear because trapped air made the thickness visible. Halfway across, Corvus began to cry. The black crescent behind his ear had spread into branching veins. Heat poured from his small body, melting the frost on her collar. A crack shot beneath Korvira's boots. She ran. The river opened with a sound like a door ripped from a fortress. Her left leg plunged through, and the current seized her skirt. She threw herself forward, keeping the baby above the water, but the ice broke again beneath her elbows. Then teeth closed around the back of her cloak. A black wolf hauled her backward while claws scored desperate lines across the frozen surface. Maldrik dragged her onto solid ice and shifted, collapsing naked and shaking beside her. Korvira stared at him with a fury sharper than the cold. He had followed without crown or guard, just as the journal required. That did not mean she trusted him. She removed his spare cloak from his pack, wrapped it around his shoulders, and gave him the child only long enough to free her soaked leg. The moment Corvus touched his father, the black veins receded a fraction. Maldrik's breath caught. He knows me. The curse knows you, Korvira replied. Do not mistake recognition for forgiveness. She tried to stand and nearly fell. Maldrik offered his hand, then stopped before touching her. May I? That small question, which should never have felt extraordinary between husband and wife, held them still. Korvira nodded once. He helped her to the southern bank, built a fire behind a stone windbreak, and turned away while she changed into dry clothes. He did not explain the dinner. He did not tell her what he had intended or how little Torvara meant. Intentions could not warm their son. Instead, he said, I read the journal. I should have read it when you placed it in my hands. Korvira fed Corvus beside the fire. Yes. Maldrik bowed his head. No defense came. It was the first honest thing he gave her. They traveled together because the Valley of Unnamed Wolves could only be opened by both parents, but Korvira set the terms. Maldrik would walk several paces behind when the trail narrowed. He would not carry Corvus unless asked. He would answer every question without invoking the realm as an excuse. If they survived, she would decide whether to return. And if I say no? She asked. Maldrik looked toward the mountains instead of claiming a right to her. Then I will make Varkesh safe enough for you to leave it. He understood that love without freedom was a beautiful cage. They crossed pine forests where moonlight remained trapped under the bark and past abandoned shrines carved with faceless wolves. At one shrine, Korvira found fresh boot prints. Bracken's riders had taken the eastern path and moved ahead of them. The commander knew the valley's location, perhaps from the same journal. Maldrik studied the prints and admitted that Bracken had once served as keeper of forbidden archives. He may know the sacrifice the text concealed, he said. Then why did you trust him? Because he taught me to survive after my father died. That is not the same as teaching you to rule. Maldrik met her gaze. No, it is not. The first night, they sheltered inside the ribs of a colossal stone creature half buried in the mountainside. Blue moss glowed along the curved bones. Corvus slept only when Korvira and Maldrik sat on opposite sides of him, each resting one hand near his blanket, without touching the other. Whenever one moved away, the child's fever rose. The curse was forcing proximity, but Korvira refused to let magic counterfeit intimacy. She spoke about the dinner, because silence had become another servant of Bracken's scheme. Did you desire her? Maldrik answered after a long pause. I desired what her father offered. An end to the border revolt. Approval from the man whose judgment I feared losing. The ease of letting everyone believe I was the kind of king they respected. That was not my question. No. I did not desire Torvara. But I used her willingness to be seen beside me, and I used your dignity as payment. That is betrayal even if I never touched her. Korvira looked down at their son. She had expected denial, or a plea that private fidelity should outweigh public harm. His accuracy left no easy target for her anger. "You came home carrying gifts," she said. "They were treaty offerings from Braken's merchants. They looked like gifts for a mistress." "I know." His voice broke on the words. "I knew before I carried them through our door." At dawn, Corvus stopped breathing. There was no warning. One moment his tiny mouth searched for milk, the next his body went still. Korvira cried out, and Maldrik gathered them both against his chest. The crescent mark opened like an eye. Through it came a voice neither parent heard with the ears. "Bring the heir to the valley," it whispered, "and one of you will leave without a name." Maldrik pressed his forehead to Corvus's and offered his breath. In Varkesh, a ruler's breath carried a fragment of the pack bond. The gift could revive a dying wolf, but each use erased one memory belonging to the giver. Maldrik breathed once into his son's lungs. Silver light passed between them. Corvus gasped and wailed. Maldrik recoiled, his face emptied by sudden loss. "What did it take?" Korvira asked. He touched the scar on his chin. "I know my mother gave me this. I no longer remember her face." Korvira had never met the woman who died when Maldrik was 10, but she knew he kept her portrait in his private chamber and spoke to it before every battle. She reached for him without thinking, then stopped. Maldrik noticed and did not close the distance. The restraint hurt them both. Yet something changed. His sacrifice had not repaired their marriage, but it proved he would pay with himself before asking their child to pay again. If this journey has drawn you into Korvira and Maldrik's struggle, stay with them, because the hardest price had not yet revealed its true shape. By the second afternoon they reached Nereth, the last village before the unnamed valley. Every door bore black cloth. No wolves lived there. The villagers had severed themselves from the pack bond generations ago and paid for freedom by losing the ability to shift. Their healer, an elder named Seln, placed a bowl of mountain water beneath the baby's ear. The reflection showed 3 black crescents, one on Corvy's, one above Maldrik's crownless head, and one coiled around a distant man's hand. "The curse was awakened by the king's betrayal," Seln said, "but guided by someone who fed it royal blood." Maldrik remembered Braken gripping his shoulder during the border council, a ring pricking his skin. The commander had stolen blood before arranging the dinner. Humiliation opened the door. Braken had invited the darkness through it. Seln explained the hollow moon. It was not a god or beast, but the accumulated hunger of rulers who had chosen possession over kinship. The first queens bound that hunger beneath the valley by creating 3 laws. An heir must be welcomed publicly, the parent who carries the child must retain the right to leave, and the crowned ruler must never place political convenience above the heir's first sanctuary. Every broken law gave the hollow moon shape. Braken intended to let Corvus die, accuse Korvira of murder, and place Torvara beside a grieving king. If Torvara later bore a child, Braken would control the succession. Torvara might not know the full design, but she had helped create the appearance that made it possible. "Can the curse be broken?" Korvira asked. Seln pointed to the pale blue ribbon. "That was tied by a queen who left willingly. It has become a road token. At the valley gate, you will each be asked what you claim. The wrong answer will give the hollow moon a body." Maldrik asked about the sacrifice. Seln's eyes rested on him. "The throne cannot restore what the king must surrender, because he must surrender the throne's right to define his family. Whether that costs crown, name, wolf, or life depends on the truth he carries when he enters." Braken's soldiers surrounded Nereth before sunset. Their arrows were tipped with duskstone, which prevented shifting when lodged in flesh. Maldrik could not command the villagers, and he had no soldiers of his own. Korvira studied the narrow streets, the irrigation channels under the snow, and the black cloth on every door. River clans taught their children that water was not weaker than stone, It simply needed a path. She asked Seln where the channels emerged. Within minutes, the villagers opened the sluice above the settlement. Meltwater rushed beneath the streets and erupted from grates around the riders, turning packed snow into sliding mud. Korvira climbed the bell tower and pulled the abandoned fire rope. The bell did not summon a pack. It triggered old avalanche wards carved into the cliffs. Snow thundered across the northern road, sealing half Brakhan's force outside the village without burying them. Maldrik fought the riders already inside, not as king but as one man protecting the doorway where his wife and child sheltered. A duskstone arrow pierced his thigh. He stayed human, snapped the shaft, and used the narrow lanes to prevent the riders from surrounding him. Torvara rode through the confusion, carrying a white cloth. Korvira met her in the village shrine with a knife at her belt, and Corvus bound against her chest. Maldrik stood between them until Korvira said, "Move." He obeyed. Torvara looked exhausted, her ivory court gown replaced by travel leathers. "My father means to kill the child at moonrise," she said. "I heard him instruct the riders. He promised me a crown, but he never said it would be placed over a grave." Korvira's anger did not soften. "You stood behind my husband while I was expected to disappear politely." "I did." Torvara did not reach for excuses. "I believed you had everything and would survive one humiliation. I wanted what your position gave you, and I treated you as if privilege made you impossible to wound." She handed Korvira a small iron key. "This opens the chain across the valley gate. My father is already there." Maldrik asked why they should trust her. Torvara's mouth twisted. "You should not. Trust the information, test the key, and bind my hands if you wish." Korvira took the key but not the offered absolution. "You will help the villagers tend the wounded. If we return, you will testify publicly to what you did and what your father planned." Torvara nodded. Consequence, not friendship, became the first honest agreement between them. The route to the valley climbed through a fissure too narrow for horses. Maldrik's wound slowed him, and the black mark behind Corvus's ear reached his collarbone. They had 6 hours until moonrise. Korvira could have left Maldrik behind and reached the gate faster. The journal required the king, but perhaps his blood or crown would suffice. That was the reasoning Fear offered. She rejected it because every shortcut in this curse was built from treating a person as an instrument. She tore her cloak into a bandage, cleaned Maldrik's wound, and used 2 branches to brace his leg. "I am not forgiving you," she said as she tightened the knot. "I know. I am choosing not to become what harmed me." Maldrik's eyes closed briefly. "That is more mercy than I deserve. Do not turn my choice into a measure of your suffering." He nodded and stood. They climbed together, Korvira setting the pace, and Maldrik following without complaint. Near the summit, the path crossed a forest of glass trees. Their transparent trunks preserved memories in rings of silver light. When a traveler touched the bark, the forest showed a moment they most wished to alter. Korvira saw herself in the nursery 3 days earlier, placing the journal on Maldrik's desk. In the memory, he was fastening his war cloak while advisors waited. She had said the baby's mark might be connected to an old curse. He had drawn her close and promised, "Nothing will take our son." She had accepted the embrace as if warmth were the same as attention. Now she watched her remembered self swallow the demand that he stop and listen. The forest offered her a tempting revision: remain in the room, raise her voice, force the pages into his hands. Korvira pulled away from the tree. She would not accept responsibility for making his neglect impossible. Maldrik touched another trunk and saw the dinner table. Brakhan proposed a toast to the king's more suitable future, while nobles laughed. In reality, Maldrik had stared into his wine and said nothing. The tree offered him a version in which he struck Brakhan down. Maldrik rejected that too. Violence would have protected his pride, not Korvira's dignity. What he should have done was stand, name his queen, expose the threat, and leave. The difference mattered. At the final tree, they saw a shared memory neither had known the other kept. Months before Corvus's birth, Korvira had found Maldrik asleep on the library floor, surrounded by succession laws. He had been trying to find a statute that would let their child inherit both the crown and the river clans without forcing Korvira's people to surrender their independence. She covered him with her cloak. Half awake, he caught her wrist and asked, "If there were no throne, would you still choose me?" Korvira answered, "Ask me when there is no throne between us." He had smiled as though it were a romantic riddle. Now, crownless in the glass forest, he understood it had been a boundary and an invitation. "Korvira," he said, "if we survive, I will ask again. You owe me no answer." She looked at the man leaning on a wooden brace, stripped of the symbols that once spoke for him. Survive first. It was not reconciliation, but it was the first future tense she had given them. The valley gate stood between two cliffs shaped like wolves facing away from each other. A black iron chain crossed the opening. Braken waited beside it with 4 riders and a silver basin filled with royal blood. He had cut his own palm and mixed it with the drop stolen from Maldrik, using kinship through the pact bond to counterfeit authority. Braken had no royal ancestry, but decades as commander had bound thousands of wolves to his voice. The hollow moon gathered above him as a circle darker than the night sky. "Give me the child," he told Korvira. "I can transfer the mark to a nameless village infant. Your son lives. Varkesh keeps its heir, and no one important is lost." The offer revealed his deepest corruption with perfect clarity. Maldrik reached for his knife, but Korvira stepped forward first. "Every child has a name before a crown recognizes it." Braken smiled. "Spoken like a river woman who never understood kingdoms. Spoken like a mother who understands exactly what your kingdom costs." She threw Torvara's key to Maldrik. As the riders attacked, he did not engage Braken. He limped toward the chain, trusting Korvira to defend herself. Korvira drew water from the snow underfoot. River clan magic could not create water. It could only persuade existing water to remember motion. The glass forest had warmed the ground, leaving streams beneath the crust. She pulled them upward in silver cords, striking weapons from 2 riders' hands. Each command stole heat from her body. Her fingers turned blue. Maldrik shifted despite the duskstone wound. The transformation reopened his thigh, but the black wolf burst through the riders and reached the gate. He caught the iron key between his teeth, forced it into the lock with shaking human hands after shifting back, and broke the chain. Braken poured the basin onto the earth. The hollow moon descended. It took the shape of a vast wolf made from smoke and crowned with human teeth. Every wolf in the valley heard its command to kneel. Maldrik's body folded. Korvira's water fell. Even Corvus became silent. Braken approached the baby. "A king always chooses the realm." Maldrik, on one knee, looked at Korvira. In the past, he had believed choosing the realm meant choosing the men who claimed to speak for it. Now he saw the realm in a freezing woman who had carried their son through a river, in villagers who had surrendered their wolves rather than surrender their freedom, in a child Braken considered replaceable, and even in Torvara returning to face the consequences of her ambition. Maldrik drove his hand into the black soil beyond the broken chain. "I renounce the crown claim," he said. The valley shook. The crown claim was the oldest privilege of Varkesh, the ruler's legal ownership of every pact bond, every heir born to the royal line, and every spouse joined beneath the moonstone. Without it, the throne could no longer command wolves by blood. Rebellion might follow. His dynasty might end. The moonstone crown, miles away in the palace, cracked from rim to center. The smoke wolf screamed but did not vanish. The sacrifice was vast, yet incomplete. Seln had said the price depended on the truth carried into the valley. Maldrik understood. Renouncing a law could still be a king's performance. The curse wanted what the throne could never restore. He looked at Korvira and asked the question from the glass tree memory. With no throne between us, would you choose me? Korvira held their feverish son and felt the valley waiting. She could say yes to save Corvus, but then consent would become another currency extracted under threat. The first queens had designed the ritual better than that. Not yet, she answered. Pain crossed Maldrik's face, followed by acceptance. Then I choose you without being chosen in return. He pressed the royal clasp, the last hidden token sewn inside his coat, into the soil. Take my kingship. Take my wolf if you must. Let her road remain her own. The hollow moon lunged. Maldrik stepped in front of Korvira without weapon or command. Smoke entered his mouth, eyes, and wound. His black wolf tore away from his body as a shape of silver shadow and stood between him and the creature. For one terrible moment, Korvira thought the sacrifice required his death. Then she recognized the choice offered to her. The pale blue ribbon around the wax disc had loosened in her pocket. One end pointed to Maldrik, the other pointed through the valley. She could carry Corvus onward and let Maldrik become nameless, severed from every bond. The child would live. Or she could tie her own river magic to his surrender, sharing a cost whose measure she could not know. This was not the curse demanding reconciliation. It was the freedom to decide what kind of person she would be after betrayal. Korvira handed Corvus to the silver wolf, which lowered itself gently around the child. Then she walked to Maldrik. I do not choose the man who went to that dinner, she said. I do not choose a crown that owns me. I choose the man who broke it, if he keeps breaking what made him cruel. She tied the ribbon around their joined wrists, and I choose only while I remain free to choose again tomorrow. Her river magic surged through the ribbon. Maldrik's surrender gave it a path. Her consent gave it direction. Together they pulled the hollow moon out of every inherited bond and into the blank wax disc, a vessel marked by no royal name. The effort burned the wolf-shifting gift from Maldrik's blood. It took Korvira's ability to command water with her hands. Neither power would return. But Corvus's crescent faded. The smoke wolf collapsed into the disc, which turned black and split in two. Bracken screamed for the riders to attack. None moved. The crown claim was gone. His counterfeit authority had vanished with it. Torvara arrived with the villagers of Nereth behind her, not as an army under command, but as people who had chosen to come. She faced her father across the broken chain. You told me power would make humiliation harmless, she said. You meant it would make the harmed person easier to silence. Bracken drew his sword at Maldrik, believing a wolfless king would be weak. Korvira saw the movement first and shoved Maldrik aside. She no longer controlled water, but she still carried the River Clan knife at her belt. She caught Bracken's blade against its hooked guard. Maldrik joined her, not taking over the fight, but matching her rhythm. They had trained together before marriage. Politics swallowed their companionship. Korvira turned Bracken's wrist. Maldrik swept his injured leg behind the commander's knee. Torvara kicked her father's sword into the ravine. The villagers bound him with the same black iron chain that had sealed the valley. Corvus opened his eyes as the true moon rose. They were not the amber expected of a royal heir, but deep river blue. No bells rang, no pack bowed. He was simply a living child, and his first cry belonged to no throne. Maldrik laughed once, a broken sound that became a sob. He asked Korvira before taking the baby. When she placed Corvus in his arms, the infant caught a strand of his long black hair and refused to release it. Maldrik stood beneath the moon, wounded, crownless, and unable to shift, holding his son as though the lack of magic had made the moment more sacred rather than less. Korvira rested her hand against Corvus's back. Their fingers touched. This time she did not pull away. The return to Varkesh took 12 days. Maldrik stopped at Nerith to bury 2 villagers killed during the attack and hear the names of the wounded. He could no longer sense pain through the pack bond, so he had to ask and listen. At the river Sarn, Korvira showed him how her people judged ice without magic. Rumors reached each village ahead of them. The queen had kidnapped the heir. The king had murdered Braken. The hollow moon had devoured the royal wolf. Maldrik issued no proclamation. He waited to speak where Korvira could stand beside him, not behind him. Their nights were cautious. They shared shelters for Corvus's warmth, but not a bed. Maldrik woke from dreams in which he searched for his mother's face and found only silver light. Korvira described her portrait, the strong nose, laughing eyes, and braid threaded with red wool. She could not return his memory, but she could preserve its outline. He listened when she spoke of courtiers, who treated her river customs as charming until they conflicted with palace law. She had stopped singing in her own language because servants mocked it. He had never ordered that cruelty, yet his indifference had permitted it. Apology became labor. He asked which laws had made her smaller. She named them. He wrote each one down. On the 7th night, Maldrik said, "I thought love was the place where I could remove my armor. I never asked whether you had been forced to wear mine." Korvira sat across the fire, rocking Corvus. "You loved me privately and governed me publicly." "Yes." "I cannot live on the better half of a divided man. Then I must become whole, whether you stay or not." That answer reached her where promises could not. She did not forgive him that night. She moved closer to the fire and allowed his shoulder to touch hers. The contact held no demand. It was merely warmth honestly shared. At the capital, the palace square overflowed with wolves and humans waiting for a command that would never enter their blood again. The cracked moonstone crown rested on a black cushion before the council. Brakan stood in chains. Torvara stood unbound by Korvira's request, because testimony given under visible coercion would become another tool for men who wished to dismiss it. Before the entire court, Torvara described the dinner, her ambition, Brakan's plan, and her own complicity. She did not call herself innocent. Brakan accused her of betrayal. "No," she said. "Betrayal was what I did before I understood its cost. This is consequence." She accepted exile from court and chose to serve Nerith for 7 years, tending those injured by her father's soldiers. Korvira agreed, but made clear that service would be supervised by the village, not converted into a noble performance. Maldrik then addressed the realm. He did not announce that the queen had returned to him. "Queen Korvira returned with the heir because she chose to face what threatened Varkesh," he said. "Her presence is not proof that my conduct was forgiven." Murmurs moved through the square. Kings did not usually separate restoration of state from restoration of marriage. Maldrik told them about the crown claim and why he had destroyed it. Some pack leaders shouted that the kingdom would fracture without magical obedience. Korvira stepped forward. Then build allegiance worth choosing. She proposed a new compact. Each pack and river clan would elect a voice to the Winter Council. The monarch could coordinate defense but not command through blood. Spouses of the crown retained property, custody, language, and the right to depart. No heir could be treated as state property. The debate lasted 3 days. It was angry, imperfect, and real. Without the crown claim, Maldrik could not end it by lifting a hand. Braken's trial revealed that the Eastern Revolt had been largely manufactured. He had withheld grain, provoked raids, and then offered his soldiers as the only solution. Peace did not arrive immediately after his fall. Local leaders distrusted the palace, and several forts refused orders. Maldrik traveled without magical authority to negotiate. Korvira remained in the capital as co-regent, not because marriage required it, but because the new compact bore her design. They spent weeks apart. Their letters were practical at first. Corvus had gained weight. The eastern bridge needed repair. 3 packs accepted elected councils. Gradually, other truths entered. Maldrik wrote when fear tempted him to imitate Brakan. Korvira wrote when court hostility made departure seem easier than rebuilding. Neither used the child as leverage. Neither demanded reassurance. When Maldrik returned at first snow, he found Korvira in the nursery. The silver bells had been removed. In their place hung 12 small pieces of colored glass that turned sunlight into moving rivers across the walls. The cradle was no longer gold. Korvira had asked village craftsmen to rebuild it from river willow, strong enough to travel and plain enough to repair. Maldrik stopped at the door. The last time he had entered that room, emptiness had struck him like a blade. Now Corvus slept beneath blue blankets while Korvira read council petitions beside him. Maldrik did not cross the threshold until she looked up and nodded. He placed no jewels before her. He brought a wooden box containing the revised laws, each bearing the seals of the packs and clans. At the bottom lay a simple iron key. "What does it open?" she asked. "The western gate, the royal treasury, and every door in this palace. The locks were remade so no king can seal them against you." Korvira turned the key in her palm. "A key can still belong to a cage." "Yes." He took a breath. "That is why the treasury now recognizes your seal independently, and the western road has been declared neutral passage. You can leave without petition." She studied him for a long time. "You did this believing I might use it." "Especially then." Korvira walked to the window. Below, citizens crossed a square once reserved for nobles. Wolves moved among humans without the invisible pull of the crown. The kingdom looked less orderly and more alive. "At the valley, you asked whether I would choose you without a throne between us," she said. "You told me I owed no answer." Maldrik's face remained still, but his hands tightened at his sides. "You still owe none." "I know." She returned and placed the iron key between them. "I will not return to the marriage we had." He closed his eyes once. "I understand. I want a new vow, one that can be renewed, questioned, and ended without curse or war. I want a husband who is the same man at the council table as he is in this room. I want my language spoken in our son's lessons. I want disagreement without punishment and desire without ownership." Maldrik opened his eyes. Hope appeared, carefully restrained. "And what would you offer?" "The truth before it becomes departure. Partnership without obedience. Love chosen in public as well as private." She held out her hand. "If you can live inside that vow, then yes. Today, I choose you." Maldrik did not seize her or fall into extravagant promises. He placed his hand beneath hers and asked, "May I kiss you?" Korvira smiled for the first time since the nursery bells went silent. "Yes." Their kiss was not a return to innocence. It carried the river, the broken crown, his lost wolf, her vanished magic, and every mile during which love had been separated from entitlement. Corvus woke and protested until they laughed against each other's foreheads. Maldrik lifted him, and the child immediately grabbed his long hair. Korvira untangled the tiny fingers with practiced care. They held the new vow at the winter council rather than in the moon temple. No priest bound their blood. No magic punished departure. Representatives of each pack and clan witnessed 2 adults making promises that carried legal duties, but no supernatural chain. Torvara watched from the edge of the square before beginning her journey to Nereth. She and Korvira exchanged a nod, not forgiveness completed, but acknowledgement of work begun. Brakan was sentenced to rebuild the roads and granaries his schemes had damaged under guard, stripped of title and command. Death would have made him a martyr to those who missed the old order. Restitution made his failure visible every day. Years later, storytellers claimed the hollow moon was destroyed by a king's great love. Korvira corrected them whenever she heard it. Love alone had not broken the curse. Truth had opened the path. Sacrifice had removed ownership. Consent had given power its direction. Consequence had kept repentance from becoming theater. Maldrik never regained his wolf, and Korvira never again summoned water with a gesture. They mourned those losses without pretending pain was proof of virtue. He learned to track with human senses. She designed channels with engineers rather than magic. Corvus grew without a blood command over other wolves, and when he asked why the cracked moonstone hung in the council hall, his parents told him the crown had broken, so the kingdom would no longer have to. On the anniversary of their journey, Korvira returned to the nursery carrying the pale blue ribbon, now faded almost white. The blank wax disc had split in the valley, but she had kept the ribbon because its meaning had changed. Once it had marked the road of a woman forced to flee. Now she tied it above the western gate, where anyone leaving the palace could see it moving freely in the wind. Maldrik joined her with Corvus asleep on his shoulder. He did not ask whether she still chose him, as if love were a debt requiring daily reassurance. He showed her the council agenda, listened when she changed half of it, and walked beside her toward the open gate. Behind them, no silver bells measured the child's breath. No crown commanded the wolves in the square. Before them, the road remained visible in both directions, and that was why Korvira could take Maldrik's hand without fear.